Can you hear me? I'm Brandon. I'm sorry, I just got kicked out by Zoom, but now I'm back and hopefully Zoom will allow me to complete this entire presentation. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the scariest part of law school. It's not the grades, it's not the pressure, it's the money. Financing law school. Law school is very expensive. And it's important to have a good idea before you go to law school of how you're going to do it in an affordable manner. And so today I'm going to walk you guys through the basic ways that you can finance a law school education, the basic ways that you can pay it back. We'll talk about how important your LSAT score is in making sure that law school is affordable for you. And then I'll talk to you guys a little bit about how LSATMax goes about helping you get that elite LSAT score that's going to really help you finance law school. I see one of you has already found it, but so this is a participatory session. So I definitely want you guys to participate. I will try to follow along in the chat box, although with a group this big, it can be a little bit difficult. I'm going to answer questions at the end of today's presentation. And so if you would like me to answer a question then, there's a Q&A box, and you can put the question into the Q&A box, and I will be happy to answer them. You can also raise your hand if you would like to speak, and I can call on you. Depending upon the amount of time we have, we might get to do some of that. So I have some slides that I want to share with you, and we will work through them and talk about financing law school. So let me just share my screen. And hopefully you can see that. Let me just bring up this presentation. All right, so let's get started. Financing law school. Law school is not cheap. Here are the averages from this year for attending law school. A private law school, the average advertised tuition is almost $50,000, $49,548. If you go to a public school in-state, it's about $28,264. Public out-of-state, about $41,726. So that's the average. But let me just show you how incredibly expensive it can get. Columbia, for some reason, always seems to come out #1 in how much money they want to teach you to be a lawyer. Their advertised annual tuition this year was a terrifying $72,465 per year. That's Columbia. Good school, but boy, is that a lot of money. That comes out to, over 3 years, if you were to pay this entire tuition, just tuition and fees would be $217,395. You can get a lot for that. That is just tuition and fees. That's just for the privilege of going in there, sitting down and learning. So that does not cover any of the cost of living or anything else like that. However, and there's a website called Cost Helper that I think we got this information on. Here is about what you should expect to spend also per year during law school. Books, they're not cheap. They look very good on your mantelpiece though. Anywhere between $1,000 and $2,250 per year in books. Health insurance. Most schools offer health insurance to their students. When I went to UCLA School of Law, they offered health insurance to me, which was helpful, but it is not free. And so you have to pay the premiums as well. You can expect to pay somewhere around $800 to maybe even $1,900, depending upon how young you are. And then there's room and board. You got to have a roof over your head. You got to eat. And at the very, very, very low end, you might expect to pay $5,000 for that kind of stuff. That would be in a very inexpensive location with inexpensive housing and inexpensive food. It is not unreasonable at all to expect to spend $20,000 a year on that. I'll talk in a second about how you can finance these things, obviously, but let's just tally up with all of this how much money you're going to be spending to get from walking in the door at law school to walking out of the door at law school. So let's just say, and this is to give you the ceiling, you were going to go to Columbia, you were going to pay full tuition. It would come to, over those 3 years, nearly $300,000. I think I worked it out to $289,845. That is a lot. And if you do not have that money in the bank to pay it, then you're going to have to find that money somewhere else to pay that. Most people take out loans, and we'll talk, there's a lot of different options. But let's just talk basically about what, were those values above per year? I'm not sure I understand that question. What was I saying here? Yes, so if you were to take out a loan, and a very reasonable loan might charge you 7%, you might want to, although this is a very long term for a law school loan, it's not entirely impossible to pay a law school loan over this term. You might pay it back over 30 years. If you were to do that, and the longer you pay it back, the more interest you're going to pay, so this would end up being a lot, the total you would pay over those 30 years, for that spit take, don't drink your coffee right now, you would pay $694,206, meaning the interest would be, oh geez, $404,000, $404,361. So the bulk of what you would pay over that time would be interest on the loan rather than paying down the principal. So that is the worst case scenario. Hopefully you will not get yourself into the worst case scenario. And I think very few people do. But that is about as bad as it can get. Now let's talk about, for the rest of this presentation, how to make it better than that. So when you go to law school, the financial aid office is going to make you an offer. It's called a cost of attendance offer. And it's a little sheet that they're going to send you. When I went to law school, it was printed out. They might email it to you now. And it breaks down what they think it is going to cost you to attend law school. The way that they figure this out is a couple of different things. So they're going to take a look at your FAFSA. If you have borrowed money for your undergrad program, you've probably had to deal with FAFSA before. The free application for federal student aid, I think is what FAFSA means. Oh, it's written right there, I should know that. And they're going to determine how much help you need, how much they need to help you over whatever resources you have in order to attend law school. Now, the one thing that's nice about going to law school as opposed to graduate school is that they don't ask for your parents' information anymore, because they're not expecting your parents to help you out anymore. I think that's kind of unfair with undergrad because a lot of people's parents don't help them out either. And so that financial information should be irrelevant, but it is what it is. However, when you apply to law school or any other grad school, when you're doing your FAFSA, you do not need your parents' information. So you're going to fill it out. You can designate up to 10 law schools to receive the information, but you can designate more law schools after that. Many schools will also want your tax returns. It's not required for federal student aid, which we'll talk about in a second, but a lot of schools are going to want to take a look at that to determine what your contribution should be in determining your cost of attendance. So once they've done that, they're going to give you a report and they're going to say, look, here's how much we think it's going to cost you to go to law school. Some of that is going to be tuition and fees. It's not necessarily going to be the advertised tuition. It might be a different number, and we'll talk about tuition reduction in a second. But they'll say, look, here's how much you owe in tuition and fees. Here's how much we're estimating that the rest of those costs are going to be. So those costs we talked about, room and board, things like that, they'll estimate those. And then they will also estimate, usually, what they think your contribution should be, what they think you can bring to the table. Now, most of them, and it makes sense, don't expect you to bring much to the table, because even if you have some resources before you get to law school, you're not supposed to be working at least during your first year in law school. And so that is important, obviously, because most people are not going to have much of an income. Instead, you're probably going to have to take out loans for much of whatever it is you need to pay. So there are a number of ways that you can cover the cost of attendance. And let's just talk through each of them, whether they're available to you personally, and most importantly, the risks associated. So for me and for most people who go to law school, the vast majority of the funding for law school comes in the form of loans. There are a couple of different types of loans, and I want to talk about each of them right now. And you really have to be careful about loans because they can blow up in your face down the road. What you want, and hopefully this will cover everything that you need, is to get federal loans. There are a couple of different federal loans. Unfortunately, these are not available to international students, which can make attending law school very expensive for international students. You get simple interest during law school, which means they're not compounding it. I'm not a huge math guy and I don't know too much about compounding, but compound interest is where when the interest accrues, then interest is charged on the money that has accrued as interest. And so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger if it's compounding interest. If it's simple interest, they're just always charging you on that initial amount. So it's simple interest during school. You get a 6-month grace period after school. That's very important because probably you're not going to be diving right into work. Instead, you're going to be taking the bar exam and studying with BarMax to do it. We'll talk about why that's important. But that's the basic idea behind federal loans. There are 2 types of federal loans. There are plus loans. You need to have good credit or an endorser for these plus loans. These have pretty decent interest. The interest rate, as of this year, was 7.08%. And you can borrow up to the cost of attendance. So whatever your law school decides is your cost of attendance, you can borrow that much. There are also direct unsubsidized loans. These have a cap of $20,500 per year. These are not based on credit. So it doesn't matter what your credit is, you can get one of these. These have actually a lower interest rate than those plus loans, which means you should max out on these guys first. It's a 6.6 interest rate. That's not a huge difference, but years down the road, when you've been paying interest for years, it will make a huge difference. So max out on these guys if you can, and then try to take out whatever is left in those plus loans. That's the way to minimize what's coming down the pike at you. You can also get from any kind of institution that makes private loans, you can get private loans. You need to be very, very careful with private loans because the interest rates are often high. A lot of times the terms can be a little bit confusing and you get a surprise when the amount that you're paying blows up later on. If at all possible, avoid private loans during law school. They're not great. It's basically the same as a credit card, as putting your education on a credit card. They do check credit. Please steer clear of them. There are grants. This is just the awesome stuff. This is free money from the government. Unfortunately, there is no equivalent of the federal Pell Grant like you get as an undergrad. So there's no grant that's just waiting for everybody to go to law school. There are also state and local grants. And so what you need to do is with the law schools that you're interested in, go to their websites. They'll probably have a financing law school section or a financial aid office page or something like that. And you can check out the information on state and local grants there. But these are by far, well, this and scholarships are the best because you don't have to pay it back, which is very nice. Some are need-based. Some are for people in underserved or underrepresented communities. Sometimes they might ask you, much like a scholarship, to write an essay to get a grant or something like that. But they are very close to scholarships. It's just they're given out by the government rather than given out by a school. So there's grants, there's scholarships. Each school has its own set of scholarships available. There are also institutions that don't necessarily work with schools that will give scholarships on all different bases. Some of them will require an application with an essay. There are some schools that will just give out a set amount of scholarship money to every student, which is nice. Not a lot of schools do that, but some do. Some scholarships are based on need. And so the school may be using your FAFSA for that to determine whether or not they want to give you scholarships. And that also is a lot of times in that cost of attendance offer that they give you. They also might, this is where when I was talking about some schools use your tax returns in order to determine your need. With need-based scholarships, a lot of times they'll look at your tax returns as well. I think what is really important with scholarships, and it can be true with some of those grants too, is to, and you can set yourself up as an undergrad for this, is to have an application package that sets you apart from other students who are competing for the scholarships, because a lot of times it's competition. So if you have a lot of extracurricular activities under your belt, or if you don't and you're still in school and you want to do something like that, that can be very helpful. Scholarships, also free money, very good. Then there's the thing that we all avoid, work. Unfortunately, at most law schools, if you are doing a full-time daytime program, most law schools won't let you work your first year. I had to sign a contract when I started at UCLA, agreeing to not work during my first year of law school. And it makes sense because law school, especially your first year, is a very overwhelming experience. And the little cost reduction you can get out of what work you might be doing is often not that great. So during your first year, your 1L year, you should expect that during the school year, you will not work. However, everybody gets summer jobs. A lot of them are summer associate jobs at law firms. So after your 1L year and after your 2L year, you go and work somewhere. Some summer associate jobs, although they don't pay as much as they used to, some of them pay very well, especially if you get a summer associate job at a big law firm. You usually have to go to a prestigious top tier law school in order to get one of those summer associate jobs at a prestigious big law firm, but they can pay, you know, very much, a couple grand a week, which would be nice. There are other jobs, like when I was in law school, I volunteered at the city attorney's office over the summer. It was great. They paid me $0 for full-time work over the summer, but it was a good experience. I appreciated it. There's also federal work study, and you might have done this as an undergrad or work study program. These are often jobs that are available on campus, and the amount of money that you make will be applied to paying off your student loans. Again, most schools will require you not to work your first year if you're going to a 3-year daytime program. And so this might not be available to you until your second year anyway. Oh, there's the GI Bill. If you are a veteran, this will be available to you. This is very, very helpful. If you are not a veteran, it will not be available to you. Well, it's available to some dependents of veterans. So if you have a parent who's a veteran, this might be available to you. But for most of us, it's not available to us. It's money for tuition and fees. It also gives you a monthly housing allowance. I think it depends on where you are and what the rate of housing is there. So these are all the ways that you can pay for law school, very broadly speaking. And once you've accepted your financial aid package and you've decided how you're going to pay for this stuff, most importantly, you've agreed to take out some loans. Usually what you're going to have to do is entrance counseling, where they explain to you what you're getting yourself into. And then when you get to the end of law school, you also have to do loan exit counseling, where they explain to you once again what is coming at you. So what we want to do, in addition to having some of these free money things, is to reduce the cost of attendance. Well, how do we do that? There's a couple of different ways. The most important one is tuition reduction. So in that cost of attendance package, the law school is going to quote you a price that they want you to pay to go to their law school. It's unlikely to be their advertised tuition. That's like the MSRP on a car, the manufacturer's suggested retail price. It's an upper starting point. And for most students, they expect to go down from there. There are ways that you can get that number to come down, and the stronger application package you put into a school, the farther down that number will come. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, that reducing cost of attendance in a couple of ways. There are targeted scholarships. These targeted scholarships are usually, they pay for books, although not all of them do. So they'll pay for books for the first year, maybe books for all 3 years. They often require an essay or an application to fill out. They are helpful. The cost of books at law school is expensive comparatively. Law school books are not cheap, but this is, even if you get that entire cost covered, probably going to be a very small portion of the overall amount that you're paying. There's also health insurance. And this is, nothing radical happens when you go to law school when it comes to health insurance. Instead, and like I was saying, when I went to UCLA, I got health insurance through UCLA. Now that there's Obamacare, this was before Obamacare, if you don't feel like you're getting good value, or if you feel like you might be able to reduce the amount that you pay in premiums for health insurance, then you might want to go through one of those individual marketplaces and get individual insurance rather than just accepting the insurance that comes through your school. So it's a good idea to just check, am I going to be saving money or spending more money by signing up with the health insurance package that my school is giving me? Yeah, so that's one of the ways to reduce that cost as well, because health insurance is just another one of those costs of living that's not going to go away when you go to law school. So then you go to law school for 3 years. I'm not really here to talk to you that much about that today, although I'm happy to answer questions about what law school is like when we get to the end of the presentation. But then you get out of law school, and unless you want to change your name and move to another country, which, having paid student loans from law school for the past 10 years, I can't say that's the worst idea. If you don't want to do that, then you have to decide, or you have to be smart about how you're going to pay this loan back. So first, let's talk about how you repay those federal loans. I'm not talking about the private loans. Private loans, you pay back like any private loan. But with the federal loans, generally they will give you somewhere between a 10 and a 30-year term, and you can often select. And there are a couple of different methods for them to determine how your payments go. So standard is just fixed payments. You decide, I have a 30-year loan, we're going to chop it up into 360 pieces, or whatever 30 years is over 12 months over 30 years. And you will pay that same amount every month until the very end of the loan. There are graduated loans. These start out low at first. They assume that you won't be making as much money in your first few years after law school as you will when you get farther down the road. So this can be helpful in shortening that term, but it's also worrisome because your loan payments at some point get much larger. So you have to keep an eye on that. There are extended. These are the ones that get more to this 30-year part, 25, 30 years. And like I was talking about before, that can help bring your costs down monthly, but it is going to end up making you pay a lot more interest in the long run. So to manage your payments, if they are unmanageable, or if the maximum payment that they want you to make is unmanageable. There are a couple of different options that are offered. Income-driven repayment, every single loan, every single federal loan anyway, I believe is eligible for income-driven repayment. And what that is that they'll take a look at the amount of money you make and make sure that you're still paying your loans, but you're not paying something that's unsustainable for you. It's usually somewhere around 10 or 15% of what they call discretionary income, which would be over and above whatever it is they expect that you're going to pay on the necessities like rent and food and things like that. What happens with this is that it may end up extending your loan by a significant amount. And so always, and with all this stuff, your interest is still accruing. So if you're doing income-driven repayment, yes, your payments come down in the short term. However, you may end up paying a lot more in interest. And depending upon how low the payment is, you may not actually be bringing down the principal, which is the amount that you borrowed to begin with. You may just be servicing the interest, which means if you were doing income-driven repayment at the same rate, you would pay these loans until you died. Not great, but not the end of the world. Sometimes bad things happen. Well, actually, that's the next one. Sometimes good things happen, like you do more school. And you can get a deferment usually if you're going to go back to school. So like I was talking about, all of these loans, they don't start charging you until 6 months after you get done with school, mostly because they're expecting you're going to study for the bar exam after that. But even if you go back to school later in life, you can defer the payments for your student loan while you're getting that extra degree. The thing you have to watch out about, and I've said this before and I'm going to keep saying it, just stay in school forever. Yes, that was what I tried to do. You can't catch me if I'm always in school. But interest is still accruing. So you're paying nothing, interest is accruing. The money is still owed and continues to be owed. So that's deferment if you go back to school. There's also forbearance. This is most commonly associated with the loss of a job, or it could be if you or a close family member gets sick or injured and you can't work. And forbearance is where your loan company just agrees not to send you to collections for a while you don't pay your loan. And again, the interest still accrues. It's not like they feel bad for you and they stop charging you interest. No, they're going to make money off of your deferment. It's just they'll make money later off of it. So those are the ways that you can kind of manage your payments with these federal loans. There are some other ways. Federal loans are eligible for the Federal Direct Consolidation Loan Program. And what that is oftentimes you'll get loans from different people. Like when I was in law school, I remember my loan servicer was one entity and then some other entity bought those loans, and it's happened a couple of different times, and not all of my loans were collected in the same place. And so a lot of times what you can do is combine all those loans, and even if you can't reduce the principal, the amount that you owe, you might be able to at least reduce your payments or reduce the interest that you're being charged on them. So consolidation can be helpful. There is a couple of things to say about that. It usually extends the payment term of the loan a lot of times, which again will increase the amount that you pay. Private loans are not eligible for consolidation. Again, watch out for private loans. They are dangerous. Here is another big warning, and it's a warning about the next thing I'm going to talk about. If you make income-driven repayments toward this public service loan forgiveness program, we'll talk about that in a second, you will lose credits toward forgiveness if you consolidate later. So what you need to do is, if you're going to participate in this program and you want to consolidate your loans, you must consolidate before you start paying. If you consolidate after, you're going to lose the credits that they give you. I'll explain what those credits are in just a moment. But that is a big pitfall, and many people have hurt themselves very badly by not noticing it. So what is public service loan forgiveness? What public service loan forgiveness is you make 120 what they call qualified payments, And then at the end of that, whatever is left on your loan is forgiven. What it requires, as you'll note when it says public service, is that it means you're working for 10 years straight in either government or public interest law. And if you work for 10 years straight doing that, you are timely with your payments, and they can be income-driven repayments. You don't necessarily have to do that top-of-the-line amount. You may end up knocking off a massive amount of your loan by doing this. Do income-driven repayment, and you're done in 10 years. The problem is you get no forgiveness until you get to the end of that 10 years. So make sure that this is what you want to do with the next decade of your life, or it could be a problem. And as I was saying, if you're making income-driven repayments on this public service loan forgiveness thing, and you want to consolidate your loans, I'll say it again because it is very important, consolidate before you start this program. Because if you consolidate after, you lose all of the credits that you made. Some schools do loan repayment assistant programs. These are LRAPs is what they're called. It's close to LARPing. I like LARPing. It would be better if it was LARPing, but it is not. Loan repayment assistant programs are, some schools will help some of their students pay off some of their loans after they get out of school. Now, they can do this any way that they want to. It's not necessarily a federal program. And so a lot of schools will do it for students who either show need, who go into public interest law, things like that. And it's often, they're not paying your entire loan. They're just helping you out with it. They're not necessarily going to sign on to help you out with it for the entire term of your loan for the next 30 years or however long it might be. But instead, they will help you pay some of it. I was actually looking at the Northwestern Law website today, and they have an LRAP, and it's available to 5 students each year. So it's very competitive and it's hard to get. Some other schools with bigger endowments, maybe like a Harvard or a USC or something like that, might be a little bit more generous. Is that everything I want to say about that? I think that's everything I want to say about that. So that's how you manage the payments. Oh, we're not here yet. But when you get out of law school, when you get to the end of law school, you may think you're done borrowing money, but you would probably be sorely mistaken, because unless you have somebody who is going to pay all of your bills for you, including your bar study class, you're going to have some way to live while you study for the bar exam. Most students, so you'll graduate in May probably, you'll take the bar in July probably, and you'll spend your entire 2 months after law school studying for the bar exam doing that. You can take out loans for bar study, and it's perfectly reasonable to do so. They are all private loans. There is no federal subsidized or unsubsidized loans for bar study. What that means is that you can't consolidate those bar study loans into the federal consolidation that we were talking about before. So this is, once again, it's like a credit card, so manage it carefully. A large portion of that cost may be your bar prep course. There are bar prep courses, Bar Max is not one of them, that cost over $5,000. And that will take a huge chunk right there. So these loans, they offer variable rates usually, which is dangerous. It means the rate of interest that you're paying can change over time. And they give you anywhere between $1,000 and $15,000. Obviously, you don't want to starve during this time. You want to be able to focus entirely on the bar exam. So you should take out what will cover you, but don't take out more than that. Studying for the bar exam costs money. So remember at the beginning, I was talking about tuition reduction and how you get tuition reduction. Well, the way you get tuition reduction is that you're offering something of value to the law school you're applying to. But you have to know what it is they value. You know, you're not just like hawking your dad's Omega watch or something to try to get a tuition reduction. Instead, you have to think about what motivates the people that I am trying to get tuition reduction from. Law school, for better or for worse, is a business. And you, for better or for worse, are their customer. And so what they want to do ultimately is be prestigious enough to have people knocking down their door willing to pay full tuition. There are a few schools like that, like the top 5, and it is very hard to get tuition reduction out of them because for the most part, they don't need you. As mean as that might sound to say, and I'm not trying to be mean about that. But for other schools, the way that they are going to start get closer to that goal of being able to charge people full tuition as they come through the door, the best way to do that, again, for better or for worse, is to rise in the law school rankings. There's the US News and World Report rankings. Those are the ones that most people focus on, but there are other rankings. I think Above the Law does rankings. All sorts of institutions do rankings. And so if you can provide something that is going to help them rise in the rankings, then that will be worth money to them. And that will be worth tuition reduction to get you through the door. And so let's talk about the stuff that they care about. What they care about, or the stuff that at least determines their ranks, are these required disclosures. The American Bar Association requires disclosures of every law school, and those disclosures are published. And that is, or at least in large part, it's how those rankings agencies like US News and World Report make their rankings. If you can help bring up their numbers on any one of these things, that will be worth something to them, and they will likely give you a tuition reduction. They must report all of these things, and all of these things are very important to their rankings. Entering class median undergraduate GPA, entering class median LSAT score, graduation rate, bar passage rate, employment rate. These guys, these last 3, all are talking about what happens toward the end of law school. And so it's very hard for you to give them information that's going to help them say, well, yeah, this applicant is going to help me on these numbers. The ones that are right up front, the ones that can get you a tuition reduction right up front, are GPA and LSAT. So if you have a higher GPA than a school's median GPA, then accepting you will bring up that median GPA, if only a little. If you have a higher LSAT score than their median LSAT score, that higher LSAT score will bring up their median LSAT score, and they like that. If you are above both of those numbers, then they're very likely to bring your tuition down. If you're below on one and above on the other, they may bring your tuition down, they may not. It's commonly agreed that they take LSAT a little bit more seriously than they take GPA. We'll talk about why that is in a second. But it's widely agreed that a good LSAT score does more to compensate for a bad GPA than does a good GPA compensate for a bad LSAT score. But you can still, and this includes your LSAT and GPA, but it also includes the other parts of your application package. You can still give them a good idea of whether or not you're going to help them out on these numbers. If they are confident from the strength of the application you put together, that's not just LSAT and GPA, it's very importantly your personal statement. It's possibly even more importantly, the letters of recommendation that you get. Then if they see, look, this person is an outstanding student, their professors just rave about them in their personal statement, they're gonna think, you know what, this person is likely to graduate law school, which would bring this number up. Having done well on the LSAT, or again, with those letters of recommendation from your professors, if they show that you have a strong academic streak, they might think, well, yeah, this person will probably bring up our bar passage rate 3 years from now. That's a while, but I mean, it's not nothing. And if you can make it clear that you have a plan for being employed at the end of law school, then that can bring up, or that can be information that would help them be confident that you're going to help bring up their employment rate. An employment rate, I believe, is measured by the percentage of students who have a JD required job, I think 9 months after graduation is the employment rate. So importantly, and I don't, if you have been to a law school application session that I've given before, I've talked about this before, but I think a great way to make them think that you can help bring up their employment rate is if your application, and especially your personal statement, makes it seem like you have your, to the extent possible, your life laid out after law school, what you want to do. If you have a goal that you're working toward, then they will be much more confident that you will be employed, as long as employment is part of that goal, than otherwise. So all of that, the strength of the application you put together, can help you get a tuition reduction. So instead of Columbia quoting you 72,000, my gosh, dollars, maybe they'll quote you 30 or less. Columbia probably will not go down that much, but who knows? I think that's what I wanted to say about that. So now let's talk about why LSAT is so very important, specifically in this tuition reduction context. If you have a very strong LSAT score, you can get tuition reduction. And it's not just because they think that that very strong LSAT score is going to help you, is going to help them by reporting your LSAT score. It's also because it gives them the best way of determining how you are going to do in law school. So LSAT and GPA both correlate with law school performance. So look at these two numbers. LSAT has a 0.36 correlation with law school, with performance in law school. GPA is 0.28. So let me define what I mean here. When I'm talking about correlation, we're talking about a number between 0 and 1. And when we're talking about correlation with law school performance, LSAC, the makers of the LSAT, actually did a study of this to determine how predictive the LSAT is for performance in law school. And I think they asked like 189 law schools, something like that, and compared the LSAT scores with the first year GPA of the students to see how well LSAT score predicted performance as a 1L law student. If there was a correlation of 0, the low end of this spectrum, that would mean that the LSAT correlated not at all with performance in law school. It would mean it would be entirely possible or very regularly happen that people do very well on the LSAT and bomb law school. It would also be very common that people do poorly on the LSAT and excel in law school. That would be a 0 correlation, no relationship. The opposite of that would be a correlation of 1. And what that would mean is that there is a 1-to-1 correspondence between your performance on the LSAT and your performance in law school. So if you do poorly on the LSAT, if there was a correlation of 1, it would guarantee that you would do poorly in law school. If you do well on the LSAT, it would guarantee that you do well in law school. Not surprisingly, and very few things in life have a correlation of 1, neither LSAT nor GPA has a correlation of 1. But LSAT does have a substantially stronger correlation to performance in law school than does GPA. It's a 0.36 correlation, whereas GPA is a 0.28 correlation. And so this is one of many reasons why schools are more interested in your LSAT than they are in your GPA, because strangely enough, we're talking about what is going to predict your GPA in law school, and the thing that predicts it better is LSAT score than does your undergraduate GPA. It's kind of not surprising because it's very hard to figure out what somebody's GPA says about them. You might have a 3.8 in chemical engineering from Harvard, and that's pretty amazing. I don't mean to be mean to Cal State, but if you had a 3.8 and you were doing independent studies at a California State University, that might be less impressive. But it's hard to tell what is what. Schools, as they're looking at your GPA, they all have their kind of secret formulas for how to tell how it is going to be predictive of your performance, how difficult it was to get that GPA at the particular school you went to. But on a very basic level, it just correlates less well with performance in law school than does the LSAT. And so a better LSAT score is going to be more likely to get you tuition reduction than is GPA for that reason, a strong GPA. I think we have one or two other things to, oh, I think that was the end of what I wanted to talk about. So the last thing I wanted to say about that though, and I think I made this point, but I just want to make it clear, is that the LSAT score is good in two ways, not just helping you out when they're reporting this thing, your LSAT. It also makes them very confident about these two other numbers. You're going to pass the bar, you're going to graduate, because the bar exam is also a standardized test. It's much different than the LSAT, but it is also a standardized test. So LSAT is very, very important. If you put up an elite LSAT score that is well above a school's median, you can expect a very large tuition reduction. I have had students who have had tuition waived entirely when they beat out the median LSAT score a lot, which is always very exciting to go to law school basically for free. So having talked to you about how important your LSAT score is, let me just tell you very briefly about LSATMax. I know some of you are LSATMax students, so I will be giving you information that you probably already have, but if you're not an LSATMax student, this information, hopefully, I think will be very important for you. So the LSAT is really important. It is not cheap to study for the LSAT. We have a couple of different packages, and I think we have a discount. I hope Claire can put it into the chat box because I'm not sure I know what the number on the discount is, but I will get back to you on that. If you sign up, you're going to get an email at the end of this session to sign up, and it will apply the discount automatically. But there's payment plans for each of our packages. So it's not like you have to pay every single dollar right out the door. And there it is, 19% off for 24 hours, 10% off for 6 months after that. 24 hours, the clock is ticking. So there's each of these packages. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what I feel separates LSATMax from the competition. So all of us are studying, for the most part, at home, indoors, mostly alone at this point. And what I think a lot of people are learning is something that we as a distance learning company have known for a long time, which is that it is difficult and it's not ideal to study for the LSAT by yourself. And so we try as much as possible to make LSATMax a community of people studying for the LSAT together, and we come about it in a few different ways. It starts with instant lifetime access. Once you sign up for LSATMax, you can study with us for as long as it takes you to get the good score that you want on test day. We give our students immediately when they sign up, you're going to tell us which LSAT you're studying for, and we're going to give you a study calendar to work through to get to that score that you want. And the study calendar lasts about 4 months. And reasonably, you should expect to put about that much time into it. And so that's one of the reasons why lifetime access, I think, is very important. If a company quotes you what they're going to charge you to study for 1 month for the LSAT, they're not telling you what they're going to charge you to study for the LSAT. They're telling you a small portion of it. So come in the door, be part of the LSATMax family. When you get that calendar, you're going to be working through our lesson video course. It's over 100 hours of lesson videos. There's homework associated with each of the lesson units. There are flashcards, there are drills. You'll be working through these pieces of the course at the same time as other students are. All of the questions have real-time message boards associated with them. So if you're struggling with a question, you can write on the message board. Usually an instructor will answer quickly. You can also talk to other students who will be discussing questions on those message boards. We have personalized support. Again, as long as you're an LSATMax student, we're here for you. Reach out to us. We'll get back to you and try to figure out a way to solve whatever problem it is that you're having. We've ramped up office hours recently. Office hours is where one of our 99th percentile instructors will lead you through a particular question type or concept and answer your questions about it. We've been doing that every day. I know at least up through tomorrow, since everyone's been in quarantine, we've been doing that every day, which is helpful. We're always tracking your performance, which is really important toward the end of the course. We have detailed analytics, whether you're taking an exam or just doing some practice, because it's very important once you get to the end of the first part of the course, which is where you're learning stuff. Then there's about 2 months of review and practice. It's very important to know what your strengths and weaknesses are when you get to that practice and review phase, so that your study is efficient and you're reviewing the materials that are important and doing practice on the stuff you know you need practice on. We also have a digital LSAT simulator. This is functionally identical to the in-person LSAT. The LSAT Flex is something different. We don't know exactly what that interface is going to look like yet. LSAT Flex is an at-home LSAT that they're giving for at least through June in connection with the coronavirus pandemic. But it's very helpful to practice with the kind of functionality that you're going to have on test day, and that digital LSAT simulator is part of that. With the LSAT Flex, we've actually made it on our desktop website. Every single exam in the history of the LSAT is now available for you to take an LSAT Flex format. That's just 3 sections. It will spit out a score for you, and so you can get an idea of what the LSAT Flex is going to be like in that case. You can download the LSATMax app. You can take the June 2000 LSAT for free. You don't have to sign up to do any of that. You can also do that on our website. So I strongly encourage you to poke around, figure it out in the next 24 hours so you can get that discount. And with that, I am going to start answering your questions. I'm going to get the ones in the Q&A box. I'm not sure that I will get to the ones in the chat box, and I think Claire has answered some of those. So let me just get this party started here. What do you recommend for part-time students who are attending law school to practice law as a second career in retirement? Oh my gosh, I don't know what I recommend. I mean, are you, I guess, asking what do I recommend as far as going to law school? There are a number of schools that have part-time evening classes. I know around me, Loyola and Southwestern have part-time evening classes. I guess what I would say is that if it's a second career in retirement, you're probably not going to be doing that big law path. And so you might want to start figuring out how to be a solo practitioner, if that's maybe what would be more up your alley. How to be a solo practitioner who's ready to practice by the time you get out of law school. The hard thing about being a solo practitioner is usually, I mean, there's no, with being a lawyer, it's not like there's a residency like you have to do as a doctor, but it is very difficult to just get right out there and take up cases, especially if there are complicated cases. So I would definitely talk to a career counselor when you're in law school and just say, this is kind of the vision I have for myself. How will I be prepared without, and this is me assuming what you're going to do, without me paying my dues at a firm for half a decade or more before I do it. I think I answered this, but I went to UCLA School of Law. I loved it. It's great. My goal is to become a paralegal. Should I go to law school? Would it be worth it? I don't think so. Paralegals do the, let's say, like filing and calendaring and stuff like that. And it's a lot different than what you do in law school. And in fact, a lot of the stuff, like I practiced law for a few years after I got out of law school, and I didn't learn any of that filing and calendaring stuff. And I had to do some of it, and I was very incompetent with it. And you will learn all of that in paralegal school. So I would go to paralegal school if you want to be a paralegal. How can I find available internships in my area? I think your best bet, if you're talking about internships before going to law school, would be to work with your career office at your undergraduate institution. They can usually help you figure out where are the best internships. You should also think about like clerking for a judge or something like that. You don't even necessarily have to be in law school to do that. What is the typical LSAT score that receives scholarships, full ride scholarships? Well, it depends on what school you go to. At Yale, no LSAT score gets you that. They don't care. Every 180 applies there. And so they have their choice of the 180s. If you're talking about like a more mid-tier school, so I was talking about Loyola here, I think their median is a 160. If you got in the high 160s or like a 170, you might be able to get a full ride there, depending upon your GPA. What types of loans are more beneficial for the student? The federal loans. Please stick with the federal loans as much as you can. Avoid private loans at all costs. Do law schools generally consider non-liquid locked up money in need-based aid? For example, I'm going to be in my 30s in law school and I've saved in a 401k while in my 20s. You know, that's a good question, and I honestly don't know. Because, I mean, what I would guess is that they would not consider it because they're thinking about the money you're going to have available to you to pay for law school and asking you to take the tax penalty of emptying out your 401k is not something that they would do. That's a good question. I wish I had a definitive answer for you, but I don't. I'm curious how you determined which area of law you wanted to get into. Did you know this before going? Should you know? Several questions. Okay, my experience is a little bit different than most people's experiences. So I determined that I was interested in criminal law for a couple of reasons. One was that I watched too much Law and Order, which is not a good reason to get into criminal law. But I also went to law school, and my favorite professor by far was my criminal law professor first year. I don't know if he's teaching anymore. He was pretty old 10 years ago. His name is David Delinko. He's at UCLA Law, and I took every class that he offered every time he offered a class, and I really loved it. I did an internship at the city attorney's office in their central crimes division. We did only misdemeanors, not felonies, but there are some misdemeanors that are pretty serious in Los Angeles. So that was how I decided. And then I graduated law school in 2010, which was the height of the financial crisis, and government agencies, at least all of the ones in Los Angeles where I live, were not hiring anybody. And I was not able to find a job. And instead, I took the first job that I could get. I knew someone who knew someone, and I ended up practicing patent law, which is the law of inventions. I hated it. I really did not like it. If you don't have an engineering background, it will be very mystifying and confusing for you. Did I know before going to law school? I mean, I kind of thought that that might be the area I was interested in, but I still had an open mind. Should you know? I don't think you should know, but I think it can be helpful in your application to know, because the more of a good idea of what your legal career will look like, the more you can present an application package, and especially a personal statement that is going to tick off some of those concerns that we were talking about earlier, especially employment rate. So schools want to know that you're going to be employed within 9 months at a JD required job by the time you get out of law school. If you have a very good idea of what you want to do, they're going to be more confident about that. So I don't know that you should know. I think it is helpful if you do. But it's not the case that they're going to reject you if you don't know. Plenty of people go to law school and they don't know what area they want to practice in. Is it better to go to a private law school than a public law school? I mean, I really don't think so. You know, there are good private and public schools. There are bad private and public schools. I think you should research the schools. Well, think about, to the extent that you can, what you want to do in law school and after law school, and find the school that's going to best suit that idea. And so if there's, you know, if you're really into environmental law, for instance, and there's a school that's #1 in environmental law, then maybe you should go there. And also think about, how much money am I going to have to spend to go to this law school? Private schools are almost always much, much more expensive than public schools. Let's see here. Do you know if the Direct Grad Plus loan could cover all expenses, $300,000 or more, for Columbia throughout law school? Well, it's going to cover the cost of attendance, up to the cost of attendance that Columbia quotes you. So if Columbia quotes you their top of the line tuition, then yes, you can borrow that amount. That's a huge amount to borrow, and you would probably not want to do that. But yes, it would cover it. It covers up to the cost of attendance. I'm considering joining the military post-undergraduate to help finance law school. Would this be recommended to avoid loans, and how would that affect my law school application? I mean, if you're doing it just to help finance law school, I mean, that's what, a 2-year commitment, I think, minimum. And I don't know that that's going to be any better than graduating law school 2 years early and starting to pay back your loans 2 years early. And so I don't know that that would be a reason in and of itself to go to the military. How does it affect your law school application? Well, there I think it can be helpful, and it could help in tuition reduction in a couple of ways. Like we were talking about, the GI Bill is going to pay for some stuff, which I think is very good. It also looks good, I think, for the most part on an application. And so it can help with those other things. It just seems like a very large commitment of your time specifically to help pay for law school. But there is the Judge Advocate General, JAG lawyers. And so if you're interested in being a JAG lawyer, it might be good to go to the military beforehand, make some connections, and then come out and you can be a JAG. Does it matter what law school you go to? It seems like the public law school is a better option when discussing terms of price. I mean, it does matter what law school you go to, but I think in some different ways than people think, and also probably less so than people think. If you want to do the big law route, you want to get hired at a Morrison and Forrester or Irell Manella or Jones Day or something like that right out of law school, you must go to a top tier law school. You should go to, probably top 20, because those firms just don't hire from anywhere else. And so yes, in that case, it does matter what law school you go to. It also matters, and this is less likely to cost you a whole bunch of money, it matters if the law school has the kinds of programs that are consistent with what you want to do or what your law school experience should be like. And so that may be a public law school, that might be a public law school. And you should do some research about what kind of focuses and programs and extracurricular activities each law school gives you. Almost always public is going to cost less than private, but it's not always that much less. 10 years ago, I was paying $40 a year at UCLA, and that's ostensibly a public school. Would you recommend going to a lower ranked school, which may be lower cost, or going to a higher ranked law school and pay more? I'm referring to job prospects, bar passage, etc. This is without factoring scholarships, grants. Thank you for the webinar. You are very welcome. Thank you for attending. I think I kind of sort of just answered this question. I think ranking is not terribly important. I do think going to an ABA accredited law school is important, but there are ones that are, far down the tier and unranked. But I would take a look to determine when you're talking about like a higher ranked school or a lower ranked school, I would be less concerned about the rank than I am specifically about job placement and bar passage numbers. So I would take a look, and those are going to tell you how quickly people at this school get out and make lawyer money. And so if there's a very low bar passage and low employment rate, then no, it's not worth going to that school, even if it's cheaper. But it differs from school to school. Are law school textbooks often available for rent via Chegg, Amazon, etc.? Do they need to be purchased outright? I think you can rent them. That kind of stuff did not exist when I went to law school. They had used books that you could buy that were a little bit cheaper. But I believe that, I believe you can do that, yes. I don't think you have to purchase them outright from the bookstore. For people interested in public interest law, which does not lead to as high salaries as corporate lawyer paths, what do you recommend to minimize law school costs? Is it smart to apply to safety middle reach schools or a public law school where you'll be more likely to get a scholarship? Well, I think the biggest thing about public law is that public service loan forgiveness program. So in that case, it doesn't matter what school you go to, because you're going to be paying your loans, probably with public service, you're going to be doing income-driven repayment, which will not change regardless of how big your loan is. It's about how much money you make. And then at the end of 10 years, it will be forgiven. And so, strictly speaking, if you were to make it across the finish line, then you'd be saving money by going to the more expensive school in a way, because you would get more money forgiven at the end of your loan than otherwise. The only worry is that you don't make it to the end of that program. As far as minimizing other costs, I mean, I think I gave you the information that I have best for that. Should individuals looking into private law be as concerned with costs compared to individuals looking into public law? Yes, and I'll say this: if you get that big law job, you're going to start out at like $180,000 a year. If you lived with your parents for 2 years while you were doing that and they didn't charge you rent, you could probably pay off your loans in 2 years, and so that would be great. However, you may not like working at one of those big firms. You may not want to live that kind of life, and so if you are taking out loans like you're going to be making money hand over fist, and then at the end of 6 months you're like, I'm not doing this big law job anymore, then you may have set yourself up for a very dangerous situation. So I would be concerned, just because it might not work out. But if you are going into big law, then yes, however much money you take out, you will be able to pay back fairly easily. Do you have to pay your undergrad loans while in law school? I believe it's a deferment like we were talking about. And so that means that you will not have to pay your undergrad loans, but they will continue to accrue interest. So they will be bigger by the time you start paying them. If you have exhausted your FAFSA resources for your undergrad, does this change when you apply to law school because it is postgrad? Yeah, I don't think they take into account how much of your resources that you've spent as an undergrad, because that's a separate thing. You just start over from the beginning. And so, like we were talking about, you're not going to get something like a Pell Grant, which is nice to bring down that cost. But I don't think that's relevant to what they're going to offer you in law school. So what would be the difference of spending that at Columbia or at a smaller, more affordable school? I mean, a law license is a law license. Well, it is and it isn't. Some firms don't hire out of lower tiered schools. And so you have to consider that. Again, I think it's important, to the extent that you know what you want to do after law school, and then try to pick the school that is going to help you down that path. If your parents are low income, would reporting their income give more aid? I don't think so, because they're assuming that your parents are going to contribute zero regardless of their income. So I think you can do it. I don't know that it would hurt, but I don't think it's going to change the aid you get. How does the financial aid work for older students who have been working and earned a decent salary? Will this adversely affect the amount of money you can receive in aid? Yes. If you have significant resources that you can tap during law school, they will take those into consideration. We were talking about an IRA earlier, which I don't know if they will take into consideration, because you shouldn't have to get the tax penalty on it. But yeah, I mean, especially if you have liquid assets, you're going to get less aid. Some of these I've more or less already answered. I wish I had better information for this question. Can you talk about how Canadian and international students may finance law school in the US? Well, I think it's basically the same, with the huge, glaring, awful exception that I don't think you can get those federal subsidized loans. So for the portion of your cost of attendance that you're taking out loans to cover, as opposed to scholarships and things like that, I think that you're going to have to take out private loans. So that's not great. If you work for the government, do they pay for all or some of your law school costs? There might be a program with your particular agency. I don't know, but I have not heard of that. I mean, I know there are some employers that will like pay for people's schools, but I don't know that the government necessarily just comes out and does that regularly. Can you pull direct subsidized loans for law school like undergrad? No, they are all unsubsidized, unfortunately. Okay, I'm seeing some kind of repeat questions. I'm a first generation low income student planning on going to law school at school right after undergrad. I'm on 100% full financial aid at my private institution. How would my financial aid look for someone like me if I get into a top 14 school, or is all aid only merit based? No, it is need based, and they will definitely take into account your need. Some of that other stuff I think can help you when you're talking about tuition reduction. So they're going to make a cost of attendance, but part of that cost of attendance hopefully will be a tuition reduction. And so all of that stuff that you're talking about, first generation, low income student, if that's front and center in your personal statement and stuff like that, then that can be helpful in just showing that you're going to be a successful student there, that you strive hard, that you have, you bring a lot to the table at the law school. But again, they're going to look at the numbers that you put in your FAFSA, and that's going to guide them more than anything. Okay, I have answered. What are the source of non-institutional free money grants for law school specifically, but not from... I'm a sophomore in college and I do not have a credit card. Should I start building credit now so I have a better chance for loans? Yeah, I mean, at least I think the plus loans look at your credit score. And so, yeah, I think it's important to have credit. Answered. Advice on getting private law firms, et cetera, to pay for your law school. How common possible is this? When does this agreement pan out? I mean, I have heard of this, but this is a determination. I don't know of a lot of law firms that have like, hey, we're going to find people and pay their loans thing. Law firms that hire people out of law school will very often pay for your bar preparation. And so that I think is perfectly reasonable to expect that if you get hired out of law school, someone will pay for your bar prep if they're planning on hiring you as an attorney. I mean, the thing with this is it's like, you go work for a law firm. Well, that's a 3-year commitment of them paying you. And what do they get out of it? So, I mean, I have heard of it happening, but I think you have to, establish a relationship and probably work at a place for a significant amount of time. And they may want you to sign a contract about, whether or not you're going to come back and work for them. And if you don't, you may have to end up paying them back. And so I don't have a lot of information on that. I think it is rare. Is there any source of information about the student employment pay of students between 1L and 2L summer and 2L and 3L? Columbia students are getting $34,000 a summer at a big firm. Can compare. I don't know exactly. You might want to look at one of the really good websites that has information, and I think they're not, biased or throwing sand in your eyes with unimportant details, is Law School Transparency. They might have some information like that. Are there schools that give a mix of need and merit scholarships? I know a lot of the top schools only give need scholarships. I mean, I would imagine most of the top schools have some merit scholarships. I think most of them have a mix. UCLA had both, definitely. Could you still get state or federal benefits, SNAP, Medicaid, assuming you qualify for them? I mean, I think, yeah, I think they look at the loans that you're getting as income. And so they're just going to see, they're just going to treat the money that comes in like income. And if that income would qualify for those benefits, then yeah, I think you get those benefits. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say this if I did. Work study must apply to loans, not to food or housing or other necessities. No, I think it can apply to both. Um, I've more or less kind of answered this, but how big of an impact on your long-term career would it have to attend a lower cost of school versus higher? I understand it's based off career goals, but assuming big law or high federal government. Well, you're assuming two very different things between big law or high federal government. High federal government, you're going to max out at, 200,000 something with how they pay now, probably not much more than that. Big law, if you make partner, you're going to be a gazillionaire. And so, I mean, you would have to make a determination between the two of those. Again, if you know that you want to do big law, then you're going to have to go to a higher ranked school. Otherwise, I think you can be a little more choosy about those kinds of things. Do you recommend any extracurricular activities or programs, volunteer work, etc., that will likely bump your application up to reduce tuition? Yeah, and I think you can be pretty broad about it. I don't think you necessarily have to like intern at a lawyer's office or something like that in order to get experience that looks good on a law school application, because law schools are not expecting you to have legal training before you get to law school. Instead, what they expect is that they're going to have you show up and know very little about the law, and that they're going to turn you from a beginner into a lawyer in 3 years. And so I think anything that would look good generally, volunteer work, extracurriculars, would look good for law school. When should I start applying for scholarships? If I plan on attending law school in fall 2021, do I apply after getting accepted? Yeah, if I remember correctly with UCLA, when I was accepted, they sent me some information about the different scholarships available and started applying to them then. But I don't think you can apply to scholarships at a particular school until they accept you anyway. Can you graduate law school debt-free? Yeah, and I think a lot of people do. It, means maximizing all of the stuff that we were talking about. It might mean going to a school that's ranked lower than some of the other schools that accept you, because the higher ranked schools that accept you are less likely to give you that kind of tuition reduction that would help. But yeah, it's possible. It happens. Is it beneficial to get a dual degree, JD MBA, JD Master of Public Policy? Yeah, I mean, it can be helpful. It adds a year on to your time at law school. I know at the very least, a lot of times you have to, if you're doing a JD MBA, in addition to taking the LSAT, you might also have to take the GMAT. If you're doing one of those other grad programs, you might have to take the GRE as well. And it's something that looks nice to employers, and it's also something where you can, learn about a particular area of law. A lot of law students will do an LLM, which is not a joint degree. Instead, it's kind of like an advanced law school degree. Like my brother-in-law did an LLM at NYU in tax, and he's now a tax attorney for the IRS. So yeah, they're helpful. For the public service loan forgiveness program, what did you mean by consolidate your loans before you start the program? Are you referring to before law school? No. So what I'm saying is, when you get out of law school and you start paying back your loans, sometimes you will have loans from several different providers. And you can take all of those loans and put them together into one big loan. And what I think the way it works is that basically your lender pays off those loans, and then you are paying this new lender for all of those loans. And it's basically like you're just doing one big loan. So what I was saying is that this could be a problem. So you start public service loan forgiveness program, you're working at, I don't know, a governmental agency or something like that. You do that for a year and you make all your payments on time and you're doing income-driven repayment. And then at the end of that year, you say, oh, I should have consolidated my loans, but I didn't. Well, now if you consolidate your loans, you're going to lose those 12 months of payments toward public service loan forgiveness. In other words, you're going to start at the beginning with that. And so what you want to do is, if you are going to consolidate your loans, do it immediately when you get out of law school. Do you recommend having a part-time job in law school, or is it better to just focus on law school? Well, your first year, you probably will be contractually prohibited from doing that. And your first year of law school, I think, is very kind of hard and bewildering. And so I wouldn't recommend working part-time then. I think in your second and third year, once you get the hang of how the law school process works, sure, I think it's fine to work part-time. After 10 years and 120 payments, will all loans left over be forgiven, or is there a cap? My understanding is the federal loans, all of them that you took out specifically with regard to law school, will be forgiven. You may have federal loans from elsewhere, like undergraduate loans. I don't know that those will be forgiven. If you have private loans, those will not be forgiven. But the federal loans that you take out in law school, regardless of what's left over, should be done at the end of that. Do you have a JD or higher? I do have a JD. I have a JD from UCLA School of Law. I do not have a higher degree than that. I guess if you're talking about the study of law, an LLM would be a higher degree than that. I don't know if there's like a PhD in legal studies that would be higher than that, but I do have a JD. Do they care about their 75th percentile or only their median? I mean, 75th, the way they divide those up, 25th median, 75th percentile, when you're talking about GPA or LSAT, do they care about it? I mean, what I would say is that if you're coming in above the 75th percentile, they're really going to want you. But do they care about that specific number, the 75th percentile? I mean, I'm not sure that I really have an answer for you. What I would say is that the higher you get above their median, the more likely you are to get tuition reduction out of them. And the median is just the 50th percentile. If you have a 3.5 GPA for undergrad and a 4.0 graduate GPA and are applying for a JD program, will the graduate GPA help in admission, or do they just take the undergraduate GPA into consideration? Let me give you an answer that is multi-part and a little bit complicated. So there is your LSAC GPA. When you're applying to law school, LSAC, the makers of the LSAT, and the people who run the Credential Assembly Service, which is a clearinghouse for all of the pieces of your application to be sent on to law schools, they will calculate your undergraduate GPA. They will use every single grade you got before you got your first bachelor's degree. That includes credits at a community college that you might not even have applied to your degree at your four-year institution. And they will not calculate anything else into that GPA. Your graduate GPA is irrelevant to that. If you did like a second bachelor's degree or any work after you received your first bachelor's degree, it is irrelevant to that. The way that they calculate the GPA sometimes upsets people because they might do it differently than your undergraduate institution does it. The most common thing that really angers people is the way they treat pass, not pass. A passing grade doesn't affect your GPA, it's irrelevant. A not pass is treated like an F, so it can only bring down your grades, it can't bring up your GPA. Having said that, that GPA is going to be provided to the schools you apply to, and the schools you apply to are not bound to agree that it's a reasonable estimation of your performance. And in fact, a lot of them might think it's not a reasonable estimation of your performance. However, it is important to them because that LSAC calculated GPA, that's what they have to report to the American Bar Association when we were talking about those required disclosures. And so if you have a low LSAC GPA, it is a problem. The way that law school admissions works is generally it's a two-step process where at the beginning they're looking at those two numbers, your LSAC GPA and your LSAT score, and they're going to put you into a yes, no, or maybe pile on the basis of those. If you're, for instance, like way above 75th percentile in both of those numbers, it kind of doesn't matter what the rest of your package looks like, they're going to accept you. If you're 25th percentile or below on both of those numbers, they're not going to accept you. They don't care what the rest of your package is. If you're in that middle range, that's when they're going to look at the rest of the stuff in your application package. And that's where I think graduate GPA, a 4.0, can become really important, because that is probably the most recent indication of the quality of work that you're going to do at their school. And so it does not enter into your GPA, but it is helpful. So I would still send it in. How are we doing on time? Let me answer one more question, and then I'm going to have to let you guys go. Wow, there's still a lot left. Let's see. Is it possible, this is a good one, and this is a good one to end on. Is it possible to negotiate for a better financial aid package? I think it is, and I think one of the best ways you can do that is to get a much better financial aid package from a different school, and then just show it to the school that you're considering attending and say, look, these people are going to help me become a lawyer and charge me half of what you're charging. So can you meet or beat this? As far as besides that, negotiating for a better financial aid package, I mean, you're certainly welcome to do that. You know, most schools will respond to you, especially if they've accepted you, and, you know, you can sit down with financial aid officer and say, look, you know, this package just isn't good enough for me. I can't put myself in this kind of debt over this. But I think the best way to negotiate for a better financial aid package is to be able to show an offer from a different school. All right. And with that, I'm going to have to let you guys go. I know there were a lot of questions left. I hope this has been helpful for you. Financing law school is obviously a very important topic, and keeping your costs down can make the rest of your life much better. So thank you all for participating. I hope I will see some of you in office hours soon. Don't forget, you're going to get an email from us. If you sign up in the next 24 hours, it's 19% off a course. 6 months after that, it is 10% off a course. So please stay healthy, study hard for the LSAT, and be well. Take care.